Have you ever had something happen that you wish hadn't? Have you ever done something that you instantly regretted? Have you ever felt like nobody sees you? Have you ever wished more than anything to be invisible? See, we're in the midst of a series called I Believe in Monsters. And we've been taking a look at different monsters. Over the last couple weeks, we've talked about zombies, we've talked about Dracula, we've talked about Frankenstein. But today, I think we could be talking about the scariest monster of them all. Today, we're talking about the Invisible Man. Now, I'm going to be completely honest with you. I didn't even know that the Invisible Man was a real monster until about 10 years ago when the movie Hotel Transylvania came out. Okay, which if you haven't seen it, I highly recommend. It's one of my favorite animated movies. All of them are great. I think there's like 4 or 5 of them. But I mean, it's Adam Sandler as Dracula. How much better can you get, right? So in the movie Hotel Transylvania, the Invisible Man is one of the friends of Dracula, and his name is Griffin, who is based on the original character from the novel The Invisible Man by H.G. Wells. Now, in the novel, you read about this mysterious man who shows up in the town of Ipping in the middle of winter. And the book describes this as an unheard of piece of luck. Now, I don't want you to think I just skipped over that, by the way. Yes, the town is called Ipping. That is a funny word. Okay? But anyway, we learn later on that the Invisible Man's name is Griffin. And he became invisible because he was a doctor who wanted to make a significant contribution to the world of science. And he had a specific interest in light. So Griffin sets out on this endeavor of how to create a serum that would affect the way that light reacts to the body and then in turn make it invisible. And he succeeded. He actually effectively turned his neighbor's cat invisible, which to be completely honest with you, I don't really have that much of a problem with. I think there's a reason that the cat in Alice in Wonderland's name is Lucifer. Cats, they're just evil, okay? That's all we're going to say about that, right? Well, his neighbor didn't think of it the exact same way that I do, right? He understandably gets mad at Griffin. So, in a quick decision, Griffin too takes the serum and he turns himself invisible in the hope of getting away. So while Griffin's in Ipping, he causes all kinds of trouble because he's completely invisible. He's constantly causing a ruckus in the room he's staying in. He steals money from people in the town, and he just doesn't care what anyone thinks about him or his sus behavior. Okay, so pause there for a minute. That's how you know that I'm a youth pastor. I'm a kids pastor because I use the word sus, right? Sus means suspicious. Listen, I promise I'm cool, okay? Now, you may be thinking, okay, that's a cool story or whatever, but what does that have to do with me? What does the story of the Invisible Man have to do with me and my life today? Well, here's the deal. Whether it was conscious or unconscious, we have all wished to become invisible at one time or another. And I don't mean literally invisible. Well, while some of us may have actually wanted to do that because that's kind of cool, you've wanted to be invisible, but you were afraid that you weren't. All of us at some point or another wanted the idea of invisibility. We've wanted to not be caught. We've wanted what we did to not be found out. We've wanted to hide something that we didn't want anyone else to know. We've wanted to be invisible. And if we're being honest, it feels horrible. You feel nothing but guilt and shame, and we really don't know what to do. Or maybe you're in a second category. Maybe you don't want to be invisible, but you're afraid that you are. You feel all alone. You feel like no one ever pays attention to you. That work promotion just never falls to you, no matter how much work or how hard you work. You're left out of that friends get together. You don't get asked on dates. You feel like no one sees you. Nobody cares about you. Nobody notices you. You feel like nobody loves you. And it feels horrible. You wonder if you even matter at all. and you don't know what to do. Here's what might surprise you. You see, wanting to be invisible and not wanting to be invisible are completely opposite problems, right? But the solution for each of those is exactly the same. So I want to tell you guys two stories from the Bible. One where someone wanted to be invisible, but if he was afraid that he wasn't. And the other where someone didn't want to be invisible, but she was afraid that she was. So there was this guy named Jonah, and Jonah was a prophet. Now, what a prophet was during this time was someone who would speak on behalf of the Lord to the people of Israel. And God had set apart the people of Israel as his chosen people. So Jonah was basically like an advisor to the king for the chosen people of God. But he would tell the king what God was saying. So Jonah was a prophet, and a prophet under King Jeroboam. Another funny word there, right? Jeroboam. So Jonah served under King Jeroboam, and during King Jeroboam's reign, God helped the Israelite nation expand its borders in a lot of different ways. You see, we read it in 2 Kings chapter 14. It says this: He restored the border of Israel from Leboamath as far as the Sea of Arabia, according to the word of the Lord, the God of Israel, which he spoke by his servant Jonah. You see, so Jonah was helping guide the nation of Israel by telling them what God was communicating to him. So Jonah was in tune with God. He heard what God would tell him, and he would respond by doing what he said and telling the king. So the passage that our story takes place in today comes from the book of the Bible, Jonah. So that'll be super easy for us to remember today, right? We talked about Jonah from the book of Jonah. So Jonah chapter 1, starting in verse 1, it says this: Now the word of the Lord came to Jonah, saying, Arise, go to Nineveh, that great city, and call out against it, for its wickedness has come up before me. So God is telling Jonah here, go to Nineveh, and go and tell them that what they're doing is wrong. Tell them that they're living in ways that they aren't supposed to, and that they need to turn their lives towards me. What God is saying here is that Nineveh has reached really a peak of wickedness. And I need you, Jonah, to go in and stop it. Otherwise, I'm going to destroy the city. There's too much evil going on. I'm going to destroy that city if they don't turn. Pretty bad news. You see, Nineveh is known in history as one of the single most brutal places ever. There have been accounts in ancient Assyrian records of how the Ninevites treated people. You see, they would go and they would attempt to conquer a neighboring city or a neighboring nation. And when they did, they would absolutely just plunder the cities. They would decimate them. They were known to burn children alive. They were known to torture adults by peeling their skin off and then leaving their bodies in the sun to scorch. You see, on top of all of the horrible things that the Ninevites did, they were the number one enemy of the people of Israel, where Jonah's from. The Ninevites did all of this stuff to Jonah's people. So to say the least, Nineveh was not a pleasant place to go, especially for Jonah. And for Jonah to go there as an outsider, to tell them that what they were doing was wrong, and they needed to change their ways that they were living, the most powerful empire, city, military at the time, Jonah's like, yeah, right, dude, that ain't happening. So Jonah decides he's not game for God's plan. No, not the Drake song. But he's not game for what God has for him. So he decides to go a different direction. Now, not just literally, a different direction physically. And I don't mean that he was going like to the next town over or a couple cities over. Jonah had plans to run from what God had for him. I want to show you just how far Jonah intended on running. So Jonah goes to the city of Joppa, where that's just outside of where Jerusalem is today. And he intends to go all the way to the city of Tarshish, which is in modern day Spain. Back up, Tarshish, another funny word. Anyway, okay, so he's going to go from Joppa all the way to Tarshish, 2,500 miles apart. That's a long way. That's actually farther than if you were to go from here in Las Vegas to New York City. That's a farther distance than that. It is an extremely long way to run. Now, I don't know about you, but I haven't ever been at a spot in my life where I feel like I needed to run 2,500 miles from my responsibilities. Man, Jonah was running. Jonah wanted to be invisible to God. He didn't really want to be seen by anyone. Maybe you've been there before. Maybe you've been in a situation where suddenly you didn't want to be anymore. Whatever the circumstances were, you wished that you could vanish. You wanted so badly to flip on your invisibility and to sneak out the back door completely. Maybe you got caught in the act of something you shouldn't have been doing. Maybe you said something, and the second it came out of your mouth, you wished that you could pull it right back in. Maybe something happened to you, and it's so hard for you to talk about. And you wish more than anything that you could just disappear and not deal with the questions or the things that people want to say to you. Invisibility is something that we all have wanted at one time or another. When have you wanted to be invisible? And an even better question, what have you done to be invisible? Have you run? Maybe you've tried to cover up a sin. Maybe you've moved completely to get away from a problem. Maybe you're just avoiding that one person. Here's the thing about being invisible. Being invisible doesn't change our circumstances. Invisibility doesn't change the situation that you find yourself in. That thing that was said was still said. You still did that thing that you wish that you hadn't. You still have to deal with whatever it is that you might be running from. You see, Jonah found himself in the same predicament. You see, there's a lot of things that happen in Jonah's story, but to make a long story short, here's what happens. Jonah ends up getting on a boat, headed for Tarshish, 2,500 miles away from where he's supposed to be. A massive storm hits that boat, right? And the crew decides that someone on board isn't supposed to be on the boat. And that's why God's punishing them with this really, really bad storm. So they end up drawing sticks and straws, and they throw Jonah overboard because of it, okay? And Jonah then gets swallowed up by a giant fish. And Jonah laid in the belly of that fish for 3 days and for 3 nights. And then the fish spits him out on the shore closest to Nineveh. I've seen evil cats cough up fur balls before, but I've never seen a giant fish hack up a dude. You see, Jonah tried his hardest to be invisible. He tried his hardest to run, but his circumstances didn't change. Our want to be invisible or to run from our problems ultimately doesn't change the situation that we face. What you're dealing with, invisibility won't fix. Running won't fix it. But facing what you're dealing with might just help. You see, if we take a look back into the story of Jonah, you'll see that Jonah eventually did do what God asked of him. In Jonah chapter 3, starting in verse 1, it says this. Then the word of the Lord came to Jonah a second time. Go to the great city of Nineveh and proclaim to it the message I give you. Jonah obeyed the word of the Lord and went to Nineveh. You see, the coolest part about this story is that God came to Jonah a second time. God could have given up on him completely. And if we're honest, we probably would have if we would have been in God's situation, right? But God didn't. God loved Jonah despite his sin. And God's love motivated Jonah to stop running, to come out of hiding. You see, Jonah wanted to be invisible, but he was afraid that he wasn't. The solution? The solution is God's love. God's love is what gave Jonah a second chance that day. God's love is what gave Jonah the ability to stop running, to stop hiding, to stop trying to be invisible. Jonah then went to Nineveh, and he told the people of the city that they had a clock that at the end of the time, the city of Nineveh would be destroyed, by God. And if their people didn't turn from their wicked ways, God would destroy that city. And you want to know the crazy part? They actually listened to Jonah. They did what Jonah said. They actually listened to him and what he had to say, and they turned from their wickedness. We continue on in chapter 3. In verse 10, it says this: When God saw what they did and how they turned from their evil ways, he relented and did not bring destruction that he threatened. You see, Jonah had a situation that he thought was impossible, and he ran from it. But the situation didn't change. And when Jonah found himself spit up by a fish and laying on the beach, he decided that he might as well trust God and face the situation. Now, I don't think that you or I have ever found ourselves lying on a beach after we've been spit out by a giant fish. I really hope that that's not the case. But we found ourselves in the mess of our own situations, haven't we? We found ourselves wondering how the heck we even got into this mess that we're in. Insert God. God came to Jonah a second time. He is the God of the second chance. God told Jonah again to get up and go do what he had been avoiding, what he had run from, what he had attempted to be invisible to. And the same invitation is for us today. God gives us the exact same invitation. Stop running. Stop avoiding that conversation. Stop hiding from the person that hurt you. Stop trying to be invisible. Because when we try to be invisible, the circumstances don't change. But when we lean into God's word, that he loves us, is always with us, and that he never leaves us alone, we can face any situation that might be in our path. Maybe you're saying to yourself right now, okay, that's really cool, and I believe you. But that's not me. I'm not trying to be invisible. I'm afraid that I am. I can't seem to get anyone to notice me. There's no one in my life that sees me enough that I would ever need to be invisible. Today, you might be saying to yourself, I'm invisible, but I don't want to be. So there's this girl in the Bible, and her name is Hagar. And Hagar was a servant to a really important couple in the Bible. But this important couple had a problem. You see, this important couple, they weren't able to have kids. They weren't able to have children. Now, not being able to have a child was incredibly, incredibly painful back then, just like it is today. But back then, there was also a social stigma with it, right? People thought that you were cursed by God if you didn't have children, and that there were issues with you and your legacy and your inheritance, and it was just a really bad deal. So this couple isn't able to have children. So the wife of this couple, she has an idea. She tells her husband, hey, I have this servant, her name's Hagar. Why don't we try to and use her to have children? Why don't you sleep with her so that we can have children in that way? Now, this may seem kind of weird to us, but again, during that day and time, having kids was important as it was culturally. This wasn't that uncommon of a practice. So the husband and this servant, they sleep together. And as a result, Hagar gets pregnant. But instead of being filled with joy, the wife becomes jealous. She should have been happy that Hagar was pregnant, that she was going to give them a child that they had wanted so badly for. This was her idea. But the wife becomes jealous and angry and even hostile towards Hagar, just for doing exactly what she had asked her to do. She began to treat Hagar horribly to the point that Hagar couldn't take it anymore, and she actually completely ran. She ran from what home was to her, ran from what was familiar to her, ran from everything because she didn't feel like anybody loved her. Hagar eventually found herself sitting by a stream after running. She's all alone. She's feeling like nobody cares about her. She's feeling invisible. And then the Bible tells us an angel of the Lord came to her. And this angel gives her an encouraging message from God. He tells her that God had not forgotten about her, that he was with her every step, that he had a plan for her life and for her baby's life. Hagar realized who it was that found her. It was God. And Hagar has one of the coolest responses that I think is in the entire Bible. In Genesis chapter 13, or chapter 16, in verse 13, it says this: "She gave this name to the Lord who spoke to her. She said, 'You are the God who sees me.' For she said, 'I have now seen the one who sees me.'" I have seen the one who sees me. Hagar is a servant who is cast aside, all alone. No one who loved her. She was found feeling completely invisible. But she was seen and she was loved. And here's what I want to tell you today. You're not invisible. There's a God, there's a heavenly Father who sees you, who loves you, who has never stopped watching you. A God who has never left you alone, even when it felt like you might have been. You are loved by him more than you could ever understand. He sees you. He knows you. He wants to be in relationship with you. He wants to talk with you. He wants to hear what you're going through. He wants to listen to what you have to say. He wants to love you like you've never been loved before. So when I was in 5th grade, my family moved. And as most of you probably know, when you move, you have to switch schools, and there's a lot that goes with that. But I was in 5th grade when we moved. And so I had to start at a brand new school going into 6th grade. And moving schools can be difficult, right? But the transition going from elementary to middle school just makes it that much more difficult, right? There's a lot going on in your life. So here I am, day one at this brand new school, and immediately I notice something. Everyone has their friend groups already. All of these kids had gone to elementary schools together, and now they're all in middle school together, and so they know everybody. And instantly, I felt like an outsider. Now, I was a pretty social kid growing up. I tried to make some friends, but it just seemed like I wasn't getting anywhere with anybody. So the morning of the 3rd day of school, I wasn't having it. I tried to get my parents to let me stay home from school, but it didn't happen, right? They sent me to school and told me, keep trying. You'll make a friend. I spent the whole day not talking to anybody, just like I had the first 3 days, right? I had pretty much accepted the fact that I wasn't going to make any friends at this new school. Lunch rolls around, and I'm sitting at the same spot I had the last 2 days, all by myself. I'm mid-bite into my delicious PB&J sandwich, right, that I made. And I get a tap on my shoulder. And I turn, and this girl is motioning me for me to come sit down next to her and this group of people that she's with. Now, I was a little resistant at first, but after she insisted, I decided to move down and to join them. What I didn't know at the time was that the girl who had tapped me on the shoulder would end up being one of my absolute best friends. We would be best friends all the way through high school. She would actually eventually be married to my best friend. We would still be in contact to this very day. When I felt like nobody saw me, she did. When I felt all alone, she reached out. When I felt like nobody cared about me, she showed me kindness. Now, I'm not claiming that my friend I met that day is God in any way, but she showed love to a kid who felt completely alone, who felt invisible. Whether you want to be invisible but afraid that you aren't, or you don't want to be invisible but you are afraid that you are, the solution is the exact same thing. The solution is God's love. His love can give you the courage to face the situation that you've been avoiding. His love lets you know that you matter. His love lets you know that the one who matters most sees you. You matter to him, and you're loved by him.